Catherine Vance did not look at the car. She looked at the line item on the spreadsheet displayed on the oversized monitor that dominated her temporary office. The office, a glass-walled suite high above the pit lane of the Circuit de la Sarthe, offered a panoramic view of the legendary track, but her gaze was fixed on the glowing red numbers. The designation was VSP-12 project. Beside it, in a column marked YTD spend, was a figure that offended her, €1,428,341. It was an ugly, undisciplined number. A monument to failure. Liquidate it, she said, her voice as crisp and sterile as the room around her. She made a small, dismissive gesture with a hand adorned by a single, brutally expensive diamond ring. Scrap the car, terminate the contracts, clear the hangar. I want this liability off the books by the end of the week. Her assistant, a young man named Marcus Cole who was perpetually caught between ambition and a functioning conscience, hesitated. Madam Vance, the engineering team, they believe the core concept is sound. They're just weeks away from solving the KERS integration issues. The engineering team, Vance stated, finally swiveling her chair away from the screen to fix Marcus with a look of profound impatience, has spent €1.4 million to produce a very fast, very beautiful paperweight. 21 of them. By my math, that's €68,000 per engineer to achieve nothing. They had their chance. Their ultimatum is simple: accept a 50% pay cut and a new management structure under my automotive division, where they can collect their things. Today. Marcus knew what the answer would be. These were not corporate drones, they were artisans, proud and fiercely loyal to the project's originator, the late Alistair Stroud. They would never accept such a humiliating offer. They will resign, he said, his voice quiet. Good, Vance replied, turning back to her screen. Saves on severance, she clicked a button, and the offending line item was moved to a different ledger, one marked, asset disposal. In her mind, the problem was already solved. The car, the team, the legacy of a brilliant designer, it was all just noise, a rounding error in the vast, elegant mathematics of her acquisition. She never once considered the machine itself, the symphony of carbon fiber and titanium sitting under a dust sheet in Hangar 7. To her, it had no substance beyond its cost. It was a ghost on a balance sheet, and she was an exorcist of red ink. Some 80 kilometers away, in a small, whitewashed garage attached to a modest stone house, Elias Thorne was also solving a problem. His hands, clean but etched with the fine lines of a life spent working with metal and oil, moved with unhurried precision. He was recalibrating the fuel injection system of a 20-year-old Peugeot 206 belonging to the village baker. The work was simple, almost mundane, but his focus was absolute. Every turn of a screw, every click of a diagnostic tool, was a deliberate, considered action. The garage was his sanctuary. It was immaculate. Tools were not merely stored, they were arrayed. Wrenches hung in ascending order of size. Sockets sat in precisely cut foam trays. The concrete floor, though stained with the ghosts of old fluid spills, was swept clean. It was a space that reflected the men who inhabited it, orderly, functional, and devoid of pretense. On a well-worn wooden stool near the open garage door, his daughter, Maya, sat reading a thick book about celestial mechanics. She was 9 years old, with her father's serious eyes and a quiet self-possession that made her seem older. She did not interrupt him. She understood the rhythm of his work, the deep concentration that settled over him like a physical presence. This quiet life, punctuated by the metallic scent of his work and the rustle of her book's pages, was the only one she had ever really known. It was a world he had built for her, a fortress of routine and stability, brick by quiet brick. The roar of a V12 engine at full cry was a distant memory, a sound from another man's life. The call came later that evening, after the Peugeot was running with the quiet hum of a new car and Maya was asleep upstairs. The name on the phone screen was David Chen. Elias answered, his voice a low murmur. I saw it happen, Eli. David's voice came through, sharp with an old, familiar indignation. She gutted it. The whole Van Stroud project. Fired the entire team. Elias was silent for a moment, picturing the team. He knew some of them. Good men. What about the car? He asked. That's the thing. She's scrapping it. The P12. Alistair's final design. She's selling the whole lot, the prototype, the spare chassis, 2 complete engine assemblies, the transporter, all the telemetry data, for pennies on the euro. She just wants it gone. David paused, the unspoken question hanging in the air between 2 continents. You know what that car is, Eli. You and Alistair sketched the suspension geometry for it on a napkin in a pub in Silverstone 10 years ago. Elias closed his eyes. He remembered that night. He had been Ethelred Racing's lead systems engineer then, the wunderkind behind 3 consecutive championship-winning chassis designs. Alistair Stroud, his mentor, had been sketching, his hand moving with frantic genius, explaining how they could use a variable geometry pushrod system to maintain optimal tire contact through the Porsche curves. Elias had been the one to make the math work. He still held the patent for the adaptive control unit that would have made it possible. It's not my world anymore, David, Elias said, the words feeling heavy and old in his mouth. He glanced up the stairs toward Maya's room. She's selling it for 10,000 euros, Eli, David said, his voice dropping, becoming surgically precise. I've seen the liquidator's brief. It's an insult. It's a rounding error. It's a chance. I'll wire you the money. No, it's not a loan. It's an investment in a friend. Pay me back when you can. Or don't. Just don't let that woman destroy Alistair's last piece of work because she's too arrogant to see what it is. Elias looked at his hands. They were the hands of a village mechanic. But they remembered the feel of carbon fiber layups, the precise torque settings of a race-spec gearbox, the intricate dance of a wiring loom. He thought of his wife, Elena. He remembered the promise he had made to himself after the accident, the one that had nothing to do with speed and everything to do with stillness. To be present. To be a father, first and always. He had left the frantic, itinerant life of Formula One and endurance racing behind to give Maya a home, a single, fixed point in the universe. He had traded the roar of the track for the quiet chirp of crickets in the French countryside. He did not regret it. But this was different. This was not about ambition. It was not about chasing glory. This was about legacy. It was about Alistair. It was about a beautiful machine being sent to the crusher by someone who only understood the language of money. Where is it? Elias asked, and in that simple question, a dormant world began to stir. The next day, Elias drove his old service van to the address David had given him, Hangar 7, Le Mans Aerodrome. He wore his usual work clothes, worn flannel shirt, sturdy denim jeans, steel-toed boots. He looked exactly like what he was, a local mechanic. He did not look like a man who held advanced degrees in mechanical engineering and applied physics. He did not look like the architect of some of the most dominant racing cars of the early 21st century. Marcus Cole was waiting for him inside the cavernous hangar. He stood awkwardly in his tailored suit, a stark figure against the backdrop of industrial shelving and tool chests. In the center of the space, under a fine layer of dust, sat the Vance Stroud P12. It was smaller in person than it appeared in photos, a shrink-wrapped Predator carved from matte black carbon fiber. Its lines were both aggressive and elegant, a testament to Alistair Stroud's peerless eye for aerodynamics. "You are Monsieur Thorne?" Marcus asked, his tone a carefully modulated blend of politeness and dismissal. He had been expecting a salvage crew, not a single man in a flannel shirt. Elias nodded, his eyes already on the car. He walked toward it, his steps slow and deliberate. He did not touch it at first. He simply looked, his gaze tracing the flow of air from the front splitter, over the sculpted side pods, to the complex, multi-element rear wing. He saw the unusual forward cockpit placement, a classic Stroud signature designed to improve driver visibility and front-end downforce. He saw the tight packaging around the engine bay, a hint of the complex powertrain within. Others saw an unfinished project, a failed experiment. Elias saw a conversation, a series of questions and answers written in carbon and metal by a man he had revered. He finally reached out and laid a hand on the rear wing. The touch was light, reverent. He ran his fingers along the edge of the gurney flap, feeling for the quality of the layup. Perfect. He knelt and peered underneath, his eyes scanning the diffuser, the suspension mounts, the underbody. He saw the mounting points for the adaptive system he had designed a decade ago. They were there. Alistair had built the car for it. "The sale includes everything you see," Marcus said, gesturing vaguely around the hangar. The car, a spare tub, all crated parts, the diagnostic laptops, the transporter rig outside. The paperwork is ready. As is, where is? No warranty expressed or implied, he recited the lines from memory, the standard corporate divestment script. Elias stood up. He looked at Marcus, his expression unreadable. I will take it, he said. The transaction was swift and sterile. Elias signed the single-page contract with a firm, steady hand. He transferred the 10,000 euros from the account David had set up. Marcus countersigned, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. He was selling a €1,000,000 headache for 10,000. He felt a sliver of pity for this quiet, simple man who seemed to have no idea what he was getting into. Good luck with your project, Marcus said, the condescension leaking through his professional veneer. Elias simply took the folder with the signed documents and the keys to the massive transporter truck. He did not say thank you. He did not offer a handshake. He walked out of the hangar, his face a mask of calm neutrality, leaving Marcus alone with the echoing emptiness and the quiet satisfaction of a problem cleanly, if foolishly, solved. The doors to Hangar 7 rolled shut, a final, metallic thud sealing the deal. For Catherine Vance, it was the closing of a ledger. For Elias Thorne, it was the opening of a door. Getting the transporter back to his small village was a logistical challenge. The massive truck, emblazoned with the now-defunct Vance Stroud Racing logo, barely fit down the narrow, tree-lined roads. Villagers came out of their homes to stare as the behemoth crept past, Elias's grimly determined face visible high up in the cab. He parked it in a disused corner of the baker's property, having traded a year of free vehicle maintenance for the space. That night, with Maya safely asleep, Elias returned to the transporter. He opened the rear loading door, and the hydraulic ramp descended with a low hiss. Inside, bathed in the cool white light of the interior lamps, the P-12 sat strapped down, a caged animal. He spent an hour just looking, absorbing every detail. Then, he went to the storage lockers built into the transporter's walls. He found the crates. One was labeled, engine spares, another, bodywork, a third, much smaller and heavily secured, was labeled, KERS, prototype components. His heart beat a little faster. He carried the crate back to his own garage. It was heavy. Inside, nestled in custom-cut high-density foam, was not the standard off-the-shelf kinetic energy recovery system he had expected. It was something else entirely. A compact, flywheel-based system, elegantly machined, with a unique planetary gear set for power transmission. It was a physical manifestation of a theory he and Alistair had developed, a system that promised near-instantaneous energy deployment and recovery without the thermal management nightmares of contemporary battery systems. It was brilliant. And, as he examined the accompanying technical drawings, he saw the flaw. The integration loom, the complex web of wires and sensors that connected the KERS to the main engine control unit, was incorrectly shielded and routed too close to the primary ignition coils. At high RPM, electromagnetic interference would be corrupting the data stream, causing the system to fault. It was a simple, fundamental error, but one that would be hellishly difficult to diagnose without knowing exactly what to look for. The 21 engineers had been chasing a ghost in the machine. Elias saw the ghost, and he knew how to exorcise it. He pulled the engine cover off the P-12 itself. There, in the heart of the machine, was the V-12 engine, a bespoke unit that Alistair had commissioned. And bolted to its side was the housing for the flywheel system. The flawed wiring loom was just as the drawings depicted it, a snake pit of compromised data. He ran a hand over the cold metal of the engine block. It was all there. All the potential, all the genius, crippled by a single, subtle mistake. Catherine Vance had not scrapped a paperweight. She had scrapped a masterpiece with a crossed wire. The next morning, Elias made 3 phone calls. The first was to a man named Gerard, a suspension guru in his late 60s who now spent his days restoring vintage Citroëns. The second was to an engine builder named Luke, a temperamental genius who had been fired from a top-tier team for refusing to compromise on his methods. The third was to a carbon fiber specialist named Sylvie, who had left the industry to raise her children and now ran a small composites workshop making bespoke bicycle frames. He didn't offer them jobs. He didn't talk about money. He said only 5 words to each of them: "It's Alistair's last car. I need you." Within 48 hours, they were there. They arrived not in fancy cars, but in old vans and pickups, carrying their own favorite tools. They saw the P12, they saw the KERS components on Elias's workbench, and they understood. Gerard, a man of few words, simply ran a hand over the front pushrod assembly and grunted, a sound of profound approval. Luke peered into the engine bay, his eyes alight with a fierce, possessive gleam. Sylvie tapped the edge of a spare side pod with a practiced finger, listening to the resonance of the carbon weave. "When do we start?" Luke asked, already rolling up his sleeves. The work began. It was not a frantic rush, but a methodical, disciplined campaign. Elias's small garage was transformed into the nerve center of an operation that would have, in the corporate world, occupied a space 10 times its size and involved 100 people. The transporter became a secondary workshop and parts depot. Elias took charge of the car's entire nervous system. He spent 3 days doing nothing but carefully removing the entire wiring loom, labeling every single connector with his neat, block handwriting. He then laid the entire loom out on the floor of the garage, a complex anatomical chart of the car's soul. He began to rebuild it from scratch, using higher-grade, triple-shielded wire, rerouting the KERS data lines along a completely separate channel, away from any potential sources of electromagnetic interference. His work was meticulous, a form of meditation. Maya would often sit on her stool, watching him, her homework spread out on a clean workbench. She would ask quiet questions. "Why does that wire have to be separated, Papa?" And he would explain, in simple terms, the concept of signal noise, of ghosts in the machine. Luke and his small team of apprentices, whom he had brought with him, pulled the engine and gearbox. They disassembled it completely, spreading its thousands of components out on clean cloths. Every part was measured, magnafluxed, and checked against Alistair's original specifications. They found the engine was fundamentally sound, but the assembly had been rushed. Tolerances were at the outer edge of acceptability. Luke and his team began to rebuild it, not just to spec, but beyond it, balancing every component to within a fraction of a gram, polishing intake and exhaust ports by hand until they gleamed. The garage filled with the clean, sharp smell of cutting fluid and the rhythmic rasp of files. Gerard, meanwhile, focused on the suspension. He put the chassis up on stands and, using a set of laser alignment tools he had built himself, began to measure every pickup point, every angle. He confirmed Elias's suspicion: the chassis was built for an active system. He and Elias spent an evening with a laptop and a stack of old notebooks, programming the control unit Elias had designed years ago. They were resurrecting a ghost, giving it a brain. Sylvie worked on the bodywork. The original team had been struggling with aerodynamic stall at high yaw angles. Sylvie, examining the spare body panels, found the cause: minute imperfections in the surface finish around the side pod intakes were causing the airflow to detach prematurely. She began the laborious process of wet sanding and re-clear coating every carbon surface, her touch as delicate as a sculptor's. She was not just making it smooth, she was making it perfect. Days bled into nights. Coffee was consumed by the gallon, brewed in a simple pot on a hot plate. Meals were simple affairs of bread, cheese, and sausage, often eaten standing around the car. There was no shouting, no panic. When a problem arose, a custom bolt that had sheared, a hydraulic line that wouldn't seat, there was a quiet conference. Ideas were offered, a solution was chosen, and the work continued. It was a stark contrast to the high-pressure, ego-driven environment of the corporate teams they had all left behind. Here, the only authority was the work itself. The only goal was the perfection of the machine. Through it all, Maya was a quiet, steady presence. She saw her father not as a village mechanic, but as the quiet commander of a dedicated army. She saw the respect the others afforded him. She saw the light in his eyes, a focused intensity she had only glimpsed before. He was tired, but he was alive in a way she had never seen. David Chin handled the outside world. He filed the paperwork for a last-minute, privateer entry into the 24 Hours of Le Mans, a long shot that he managed to secure through a combination of legal savvy and calling in old favors. The team name he registered was simple: Stroudthorne. The car, a matte gray ghost with no sponsors, was designated the A01 for Alistair, Model 1. The night before the first qualifying session, they were finally ready. The rebuilt wiring loom was installed. The blueprint engine was back in the chassis. The perfected bodywork was fitted, its surface like black glass. They rolled the car out of the garage and into the cool night air. The entire team gathered around, their faces smudged with grease and fatigue, their eyes filled with a shared, nervous anticipation. Elias climbed into the tight cockpit. He strapped himself in. He looked at Maya, who stood by the front wheel, her small hand resting on the tire. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. Then he flipped a series of switches on the dashboard. The fuel pumps whined. He pressed the starter button. The engine turned over once, twice, and then erupted into life. It was not a chaotic roar. It was a clean, sharp, shockingly loud howl, a perfectly synthesized chord of mechanical violence. It was the sound of 1,000 perfect parts working in absolute harmony. The exhaust pipes glowed cherry red in the darkness. Luke closed his eyes, a beatific smile on his face, listening to the song of his creation. Gerard laid a hand on the chassis and felt the vibration, a steady, powerful hum with no hint of discord. The ghost in the machine was gone. Only the soul remained. Their arrival in the Le Mans paddock was met with curiosity and a fair amount of pity. Their pit garage was at the far end of the lane, the space usually reserved for amateur teams with more hope than funding. They had no lavish hospitality suite, no army of PR staff. They had the transporter, a handful of rolling tool chests, and the matte gray car. The other teams, with their multi-million euro budgets and gleaming corporate liveries, barely gave them a second glance. They were nobodies. Then came qualifying. Elias did not hire a famous driver. He hired a young, talented but overlooked pilot named Julian, a driver with immense natural skill but no funding, who had been racing in lower formulas. Elias's instructions to him were simple. Don't push for the first 5 laps. Let the tires and brakes come to temperature. Listen to the car. On lap 6, use the KERS deployment button on the exit of Tertre Rouge and again on the exit of Mulsanne Corner. Nowhere else. Just those 2 places. Trust the system. Julian did as he was told. The first few laps were quick, but not spectacular. The car looked stable, planted. Then, on lap 6, the world tilted. As Julian exited Tertre Rouge and squeezed the throttle, he pressed the small red button on the steering wheel. The effect was not a push, it was a detonation. The flywheel system discharged its stored energy in a single, brutal surge of torque. The car didn't just accelerate, it teleported down the first section of the Mulsanne Straight. On the official speed trap, the Stroudthorne A01 registered a speed 10 km/h faster than any other car on the track. On the timing screens around the circuit, a new name appeared at the top of the leaderboard. Stroudthorne A01. The lap time was absurd. It was 2 full seconds faster than the pole time set by the dominant factory Porsche team. Announcers in the commentary booth fumbled with their notes, trying to figure out who these people were. Team principals in other pit boxes stared at their monitors in disbelief, running simulations that told them such a time should not be possible. Slowly, a migration began. A few journalists, then a few rival engineers, then team managers and scouts began to drift down the pit lane toward the quiet, unassuming garage at the end. They saw the stark gray car, its engine still ticking as it cooled. They saw Elias Thorne, in his simple flannel shirt, quietly debriefing his driver, pointing at a telemetry screen. They saw a small team of old-timers methodically checking tire pressures and brake temperatures. There was no celebration, no shouting. Just quiet, focused work. Among the crowd was a senior executive from a major Japanese automotive company, a man renowned for his ability to spot breakthrough technologies. He watched Elias for 20 minutes, ignoring the car completely. He watched the way Elias communicated with his team, the quiet authority he commanded, the economy of his movements. Finally, he approached. "Thorne-san," he asked, his voice polite but direct. Elias looked up from the laptop. "Yes. My name is Kenji Tanaka. I am not interested in your lap time. I am interested in your flywheel. The energy deployment signature is unique. We would like to discuss licensing the technology." He handed Elias a business card. The offer was not for a sponsorship. It was for a technological partnership, a deal that, if realized, would be worth more than the entire budget of most of the teams on the grid. High above the track, in her climate-controlled suite, Catherine Vance was entertaining a group of potential investors. Champagne flowed. The mood was buoyant. She was explaining the strategic genius of her acquisition of the parent company, highlighting the real estate and brand assets. The failed racing division was a footnote she had cleverly excised. A masterful move, Catherine, one of the investors said, raising his glass. Cutting the dead weight from that racing program was a clear signal of intent. One must be ruthless with underperforming assets, she replied with a self-satisfied smile. It was then that Marcus Cole, or rather, the former Marcus Cole, sent a single text message to a trusted journalist from a major motorsport publication. The text contained a link to a shared document. The document was a meticulously compiled timeline of every communication Catherine Vance had issued regarding the VSP-12 project, including the directive to liquidate it for scrap. At that same moment, another guest in Vance's suite, a hedge fund manager with a passion for racing, looked at the live timing on his tablet. Good heavens, he muttered. He showed the screen to the man next to him. Look at this. Some privateer called Stroudthorne is blowing the doors off the factory Porsches. Where did they come from? Vance overheard the name. She laughed lightly. Stroud. A coincidence. Alistair Stroud's last project was a spectacular failure. We just wrote it off. Her new assistant, a nervous young woman who had replaced Marcus, approached her, her face pale. She held out her own tablet. On the screen was a news alert from the very journalist Marcus had texted. The headline read, "The Phoenix of Le Mans, How Catherine Vance Scrapped a €1 million miracle for €10,000." The article detailed the entire story, including the name of the quiet buyer, Elias Thorne, the legendary former chief engineer of Ethelred Racing. It cross-referenced the car's design with patents held by Thorne and the late Alistair Stroud. It laid the entire truth bare. Catherine Vance read the headline. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the polished floor. The sound was lost in the sudden, shocked silence of the room. Her face, a carefully constructed mask of corporate poise, began to crumble. Disbelief warred with a rising, sickening wave of fury. She looked out the window, down toward the far end of the pit lane, where a small crowd was gathered around a garage that was supposed to be empty, around a car that was supposed to be a pile of crushed metal and broken dreams. The €14 million car she had dismissed as a rounding error was now the biggest story in the automotive world, and she was its villain. Get him out, she hissed at her security detail, pointing at the investor who had first shown her the timing screen. Her composure was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate rage. She then turned on her new assistant. You. Find out who their lawyer is. Find out what intellectual property clauses were in that sale agreement. I want that car back. I want that technology. I will ruin him. Her tirade was cut short when her phone buzzed. It was a call from her own company's CEO. She answered, forcing a calm she did not feel. She was met with a glacial voice. Catherine. We have a problem. Our stock just dropped 7% in after-hours trading. Explain this Stroudthorne situation to me. Now. The walk from her pristine suite down to the gritty reality of the pit lane was the longest of Catherine Vance's life. The scent of champagne and perfume was replaced by the acrid smell of hot brakes and high-octane fuel. She strode through the crowd, her expensive heels clicking on the grimy asphalt, a bubble of cold fury separating her from the world. Her remaining assistant and a corporate lawyer scurried in her wake. Elias's garage was an island of calm in the swirling sea of excitement. The team was performing their post-qualifying checks with the quiet efficiency of a surgical team. Elias himself was leaning against a workbench, sipping water from a plastic bottle, talking to David Chen. Vance did not wait for an invitation. She marched directly to Elias, her anger a palpable force field. Mr. Thorne, she began, her voice tight and low. You have a great deal of explaining to do. That car, and the technology within it, is the intellectual property of Vance Automotive. Elias finished his water. He set the bottle down with a soft click. He looked at her, his eyes calm and devoid of any emotion she could recognize, not fear, not anger, not even triumph. It was the detached gaze of an engineer examining a faulty component. David Chen stepped forward slightly, placing himself between them. Madam Vance, David said, his tone polite but firm as steel. I am David Chen, Mr. Thorne's legal counsel. Perhaps you should confer with your own. The sale agreement, which your office drafted, was for all assets related to the VSP-12 project, designated as is, whereas the transfer of ownership was absolute and included all associated physical and intellectual property, with no residual claims. You sold it all. The car, the designs, the data. It belongs to my client now. Entirely. The lawyer behind Vance paled. He had been the one to use the company's standard, boilerplate asset disposal contract to save time, never imagining the asset in question had any real value. He had not included the customary IP retention clauses. It was an unthinkable oversight, born from the same dismissive arrogance as his boss. Vance's face tightened. The legal argument had failed. She switched tactics, attempting to reassert her dominance through sheer force of will. This is not over. You may have found a loophole, but you cannot possibly hope to campaign this car, to develop this technology, without the resources of a real corporation. I am prepared to be generous. I will offer you a partnership. We will bring the Stroud-Thorne project back into the Vance portfolio. You will work for me. We will fund your development, and you will have access to our global network. She was not offering a partnership, she was offering a leash. Elias looked past her, at the car. He looked at Luke, who was lovingly polishing a wrench. He looked at Gerard, who was sketching a modification on a notepad. He looked at Maya, who was watching from the doorway of the transporter, her expression one of fierce, unwavering loyalty. He had everything he needed right here. He had skill, he had purpose, and he had his family, the one he was born into and the one he had built. He finally turned his gaze back to Catherine Vance. The silence stretched, thick with tension. The entire garage seemed to hold its breath. No, Elias said. The word was not shouted. It was not angry. It was a simple, quiet, definitive statement of fact. It was a door closing. It carried the weight of 1,000 meticulously torqued bolts, of a perfectly balanced crankshaft, of a life rebuilt on a foundation of integrity. Vance stared at him, speechless. The word, so small and yet so absolute, had shattered her reality. She was a woman who bought and sold companies, who moved markets with a phone call. No one said no to her. But this quiet man in a flannel shirt had, and in doing so, he had taken everything from her. Not her money, but her power. Defeated, she turned and walked away, the crowd parting before her. The retreat back to her glass tower was a walk of shame, each step an admission of her catastrophic misjudgment. The story of her hubris would become a legend in the business world, a cautionary tale taught in MBA programs for years to come. The race itself was almost an epilogue. The Stroud-Thorne A-01 did not win. A victory on the first attempt would have been a fairy tale. Instead, it achieved something more real, more impressive. It ran for 24 hours without a single mechanical failure. The rebuilt engine, the perfected KERS, the flawless suspension, they all performed exactly as designed. The car finished third, a podium position that was, for a tiny privateer team in their debut race, a victory more stunning than first place. They had not just competed, they had endured. They had proven the concept beyond any doubt. In the weeks that followed, the world came to Elias Thorne. The technology licensing deal with Tanaka's firm was finalized, the numbers on the contract containing more zeros than Elias had ever imagined seeing. It ensured not just his own financial security, but that of every member of his small, loyal team. He established a new company, a small, elite engineering firm dedicated to innovation. He called it, simply, Thorne Engineering. His first business decision was to make an offer on a piece of property. The offer was accepted without negotiation. A few months later, Elias stood outside Hangar 7 at the Le Mans Aerodrome. The old, peeling, Vance Stroud Racing logo was gone. In its place, a team was installing a new sign. It was simple, understated, black letters on a brushed aluminum background. Thorne Engineering, it was not a monument to ego. It was a statement of purpose. Inside, the hangar was no longer empty. It was alive. The A-01 sat in a place of honor, its matte gray paint now bearing the subtle, respectful logo of their new Japanese partner. Workstations were being set up. New machinery, paid for with the first installment of the licensing fee, was being uncrated. Luke, Gerard, and Sylvie were already there, arguing good-naturedly over the layout of the new engine-building clean room. The narrative of Elias's victory was not one of revenge. Catherine Vance's career imploded as a consequence of her own actions, a footnote in his story, not its purpose. The true victory was quieter. It was the hum of activity in the new workshop. It was the security he could now provide for Maya. It was the freedom to pursue perfection on his own terms. That evening, Elias stood with Maya in the vast, quiet hangar, looking at the car that had changed their lives. The setting sun streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows. He hadn't changed. He wore a clean flannel shirt and jeans. His success hadn't made him louder or more arrogant. It had simply affirmed who he had always been. "You fixed it, Papa," Maya said, her small voice echoing slightly in the huge space. "We fixed it," he corrected her gently. He knelt beside her, pointing not at the whole car, but at a small, intricate part of the front suspension. "You see this piece? This is a pushrod. It connects the wheel to the damper inside the car. But this one is special." He began to explain, his voice a low, patient murmur. He was not a corporate titan or a vanquisher of rivals. He was a father, a craftsman, a quiet master in his element, sharing his passion with his daughter. He had been underestimated, dismissed, and discarded. But through quiet competence, methodical work, and an unwavering belief in substance over surface, he had built a new world from the scraps of someone else's arrogance. And in that quiet, perfect execution of his craft, he had found a success more profound and satisfying than any trophy. He had won on his own terms.